Porter Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take this call. It is quite a meaty bill, and there's many sections of it that we will no doubt cover over the course of this committee stage debate. I want to start perhaps with just saying that we all know that as a result of the earthquake sequence in Canterbury, that work has been done to assure the public of New Zealand that we are taking full cognizance of the risk of earthquakes and the state of our buildings across the country to ensure that we've got plans in place to ensure that we don't have similar types of issues that we had in Canterbury. And specifically, there is within this bill three main issues that really speak to some of the concerns that came out of the Canterbury earthquake sequence. My colleague talked about actually deciding triage, I guess, of seismic risk, of developing a process that really looked at identifying which areas, what type of earthquake posed more risk to buildings than others. And we've stratified that into three categories of low, medium and high. And many of you, I don't know if you have the QuakeNet app on your phone, I certainly do. It's a bit of a pastime to see where quakes have been happening around the country. We've been getting quite a few through Porongahau and through some areas of the country, but a lot of those kind of lower level earthquakes, when they occur, cause very little damage to buildings in those areas. So stratifying the risk, identifying what is low, medium and high has been very useful, and actually having a definition for the medium seismic risk within this piece of legislation is useful as well. Identifying some priority buildings as well, those that we know that we should be attending to first. So under the MB guidelines, they have been identified as being, the hospitals and emergency services, certain educational facilities, and I want to speak to the reinforced masonry, unreinforced masonry buildings separately. But those two first, the hospitals and the educational facilities, are important regardless of where they are across the country, that they have a priority, because not only are they centres for medical support, but in times of disaster, they actually become the hub for the community. So they become the place that the community will go to ensure they can get information or they can get be accommodated, because often school facilities are used as places where people can stay, where they can get a meal, where they can get information on what is happening in a disaster. So it's great that those buildings have been identified as being a priority for assessment, for then going on to have the work to strengthen them should that be required. But I come to the third point I wanted to make, and that is that it's really important that this bill includes the issue of unreinforced masonry, because we know that most significantly during the February earthquake in Canterbury, the parapets and verandas that fell on people and on vehicles actually caused significant harm. In fact, I think about 40 people lost their lives when parapets fell. So it was really important that as part of this legislation, we take care of those buildings which have those unreinforced structures attached to them. Just in relation to the supplementary order papers by David Seymour, I noticed that there's been quite an extraordinary amount of work that has gone into particularly supplementary order paper 156, which really looks at the earthquake life risk rating and through a process of identifying, Mr. Chairman, identifying the risk rating for a particular building and doing an assessment of that. Mr. Seymour is attempting to, I guess, provide a mechanism for those owners of those properties to then find the ability to identify what is low risk, and then if they can identify that they are low risk, then they are able to receive an exemption. The exemption is then noted in the register, and then any material changes to that particular building would mean that the building owner would no longer cease to qualify for that exemption, and a material change in circumstances would be noted. I do note, however, that it's the owner's responsibility to notify when there are a change in circumstances to the territorial authority, and this does put the onus back on the owner to do this work. My only argument against this proposal is that I think it would be much better that we actually build our buildings up to building code in the first place, and that we don't then have to have an assessment to assess which buildings are low priority to be remediated in terms of their earthquake-prone nature. It would be much more positive to have the solution being good engineering and substantial building codes to build buildings properly in the first place, because there is an issue that we have that may not be identified with this. There is a set of criteria that within this SOP which could determine what buildings are low risk. You know, that's the seismic capacity of the building, the construction characteristics, the occupancy and when this building is occupied, the conditions that might change to affect the earthquake risk rating, the seismic risk and its location to other buildings. If you will recall, during the Canterbury earthquakes, the Hotel Grand Chancellor was one such building which posed a risk to the other buildings around it. And those buildings weren't necessarily damaged to the extent that they had to be demolished. However, because of the threat of the Hotel Grand Chancellor falling on top of them, they became hugely risky. Those buildings were closed, and as a result of the risk posed to them by another building. So I would want for Mr. Seymour to consider within this SOP whether the risk rating of a particular building is dependent on the building next door to it or in proximity that might cause it some risk. That, I think, is something that Mr. Seymour might want to explore. On that note, there's plenty to explore within this bill, and I'm happy to take a call later. Thank you.